Beh, io innanzitutto vorrei ringraziare tutti quelli che sono qui oggi per questo bellissimo workshop, in modo particolare Anthony Tamburi che conosco da tantissimi anni, eravamo insieme a Berkeley, e naturalmente Carlo Davoli, Roberto Dolci e i miei colleghi qui con cui stiamo cercando stiamo vivendo dei momenti molto belli in questo viaggio dell'intercomprehension. Um, I have so many things to say. I'm going to try to not go over too much. I'm very grateful to my colleague Marcus Mueller, who will be following me. And there are times when we may interrupt each other's presentations, but to add things, because this really has been a journey of several people. But I wanted to tell you that I really began my career, I really wanted to be a high school teacher of Italian. And when I finished my degree at Berkeley and came to Southern California, I discovered I couldn't do it because there were very few schools, and in order to get a credential, I needed to go back to San Francisco. There was no credential program in Southern California. Some of the realities of California, we're always very envious of the East Coast because you have so many high schools and so many schools. However, over the years, and having done a PhD in Romance languages, literatures, and linguistics, I did French, Italian, and Spanish. I really started to think about who our students were and what was happening. But before I begin, I wanted to start with an anecdote that I think brings another perspective and tells us really that we are living in times in which intercomprehension, better than anything else, describes the intercultural experiences we're also having. So my daughter was in Florence for a year, and I was visiting her, and I had their apartment to myself. And I had stayed up very late working on something and went to bed very late, and then was awakened around 2 o'clock in the morning by the sound of accordions and a trumpet in the street playing and singing O Sole Mio. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window to find these wandering minstrels under my second-floor dining room window, playing their hearts out in a deserted street. As I said, it was 2 o'clock. I was in the quartiere of San Frediano, miraculously untouched by tourists, and the people were deep in the noonday meal or perhaps already having a nap. The trio walking through the streets, led by the trumpeter, struck me immediately as a cross between Giulietta Massina announcing the arrival of Zampano in La Strada and a mariachi band from California, the last iteration I had witnessed of walking minstrels. The Fellini-esque quality of the performance harked back to an Italy now rarely encountered. As I watched them play, and they acknowledged with smiles and the waving of the hat with which they were collecting offerings for their playing, I realized that despite their Mediterranean-looking physiognomy, they could not be the Neapolitans they were performing. When I asked them where they were from, they looked at each other warily, then back at me and said, Romania. They had come from Bologna to Florence, they said, to perform for tourists who don't know where they are from. They also said that they usually don't have much luck in San Frediano because too many Italians reside there and they yell at them from the windows and tell them to go away. They also told me that they love Neapolitan music, which reminds them of the folk music traditions of Transylvania, where they were from. As they caught the 20-euro bill that I threw down to them and that wafted down in the breeze, and they turned to continue on in the streets, I realized that there were a number of similarities to their reality and stories and intercomprehension that I'm going to talk about today. I also realized that their presence and performance in today's Italy raised a number of thought-provoking issues about cultural and linguistic transmission, as well as language and culture as identity. And this is where this notion of the title of my presentation, The Ties That Bind, comes from. We are linked in many ways as Romance language speaking peoples, as Romance language performing other Romance language peoples, but these ties are very important. So bilingualism and multilingualism in America, I'm starting a bit with what Roberto showed us. So I have some other census data, and this comes from some of the work of some of the most renowned second language acquisition specialists working in the field of Spanish, right? It's very interesting to me that we've never really read their work. I've started reading it a lot because, of course, my students are heritage speakers. But Kim Potowski, University of Illinois at Chicago, is one of them. She has actually started working now also in Italy and in Italian. So it's very interesting how the group of second language acquisition specialists in Spanish in particular are starting, they too are starting to look at multilingualism and intercomprehension of the Romance languages. So they looked at the census data and found that 65% of Americans are either bi or multilingual. Of course, you would never know this from the political discourse, right, of the nation. Now, at California State University, this is a reality we see in our classrooms every day. Last Saturday, we actually had an ACTFL seminar for Italian teachers in California. I was very happy at the number who came because we don't have that many high school students. And the ACTFL expert who spoke made a very important point. She began her presentation saying, know the language history of your students, yet it was dropped there. So know the language history of your students, but I asked, what are you going to do with it? What are we going to do with this language history? And this I think is the state that many of us are in. We know that we have students in our classrooms who are Spanish speakers, but we aren't doing anything with it. The reasons for that we know. It's very difficult to move out of the communicative approach, which has a hold on American language teaching pedagogy that is very difficult to move out from. But if we don't start thinking about it, who our students are won't matter at all. And for Italian, and looking at those statistics that Roberto just showed, we all need to be really worried about the fact that the students do not go on. However, the Spanish speakers do, and this has been the story of success of our program. Some of you may know we have been able to add the master's degree in Italian. We'll start next year because of growing numbers in Italian. And our growing numbers in Italian have to do with the fact that we have really seriously worked with the Spanish-speaking population. So, three phases of a language teaching transformation at CSULB. What to do, so looking at who our students are, what to do, how it started, what we did our first 4 years, and what we are doing, how we are teaching our classes, our projects, and where they are going. And as everyone has said, this is really a long-term project. We really have to stick with it. And it's been wonderful to find people to collaborate with throughout the nation, and also to receive this kind of endorsement from the Italian government about what this is. In terms of raising AP numbers, I can't think of a better way to do it. So we are a Department of Romance, German, Russian Languages and Literatures. That's our name. California State University. We have BA and MA programs in French, German, Italian MA coming in 2014, and Spanish. We credential teachers and we train teaching associates for our own language programs. And this has been, this is the job of Dr. Mueller. He is the language coordinator for all languages. One of the advantages I think we have is that we are all in one department in a certain sense. It makes it easy to work with the faculty in Spanish as well because we are in one department. And we also, the credentialing person sits also in our department. So we have a very close relationship with all issues of language pedagogy and training. We are a nationally recognized Hispanic serving institution. As you may know, the federal government has recognized institutions with over 30% of Hispanic students as an HSI, Hispanic serving, not an HIS, an HSI. And these institutions seek to expand educational opportunities for and improve the attainment of Hispanic students. Now, this sounds great. It sounds like, wow, there must be a lot of money to help us. There's a lot of money for STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. However, there's not much money for the humanities, and this is really something we need to push. What better way to expand educational opportunities and improve attainment of Hispanic students than facilitating their acquisition of another language through a language they already know? This is how we were able to get an NEH grant. This was a special initiative for Hispanic serving institutions. National Endowment for the Humanities funded our French and Italian for Spanish speakers. Dr. Mueller, our colleague Claire Martin, professor of Spanish, and myself are part of this. And the goal, of course, is to expand what we're doing to other institutions. And that's how San Pedro High School became the first high school to embark upon an Italian for Spanish speakers track, also for French. They have launched this together. So in the Italian class, they recruited 45 students in Italian for Spanish speakers. In French, there are 41 students in French for Spanish speakers. We made a site visit a few weeks ago. We're going to be taking some of our people there on the 7th of October to make presentations to these students. One of the things that we'll talk about and where there's the most work to do is what is the curriculum? These are some of the big issues. But we've been very fortunate also to have wonderful collaboration with William Chang, who is the director of foreign languages for the entire Los Angeles Unified School District. And he has worked with us to make these programs part of the official language courses recognized for going to college. So this is really wonderful because the political aspects of these things are huge. Being able to articulate these courses has been very important. And we can talk a little bit more about that too, about how they did this, how they started this track. That's another whole presentation in a sense. So we, Intercomprehension comes to CSULB. We actually began just teaching French for Spanish speakers. It started with French before Italian. And again, wearing the two hats of French and Italian, it's been great because I've been able to move back and forth. And a very visionary cultural attaché in Los Angeles actually came and gave a presentation in one of my classes on Rousseau. He was a Rousseau specialist. But when he saw the context of our department, he said, would you like to be a part of a project on intercomprehension, because we are beginning to look at the Spanish-speaking world and thinking of ways to promote French there, and we're trying to argue that California and Florida are Spanish-speaking countries. And he said, I think we can get some funding for this. And I said, sure, we'll sign up, we'll write a proposal. And we did, and we got this funding. Once we got this funding, though, we had to do something. You know, so things, it's always great. You get the money, and then you have to do something. So we started this class of French for Spanish speakers, and we had some faculty who, taught, who could speak French and Spanish. And we just started doing it. I mean, we just started doing it, mainly by accelerating the classes a little. We started experimenting, because if you don't try things, nothing happens, right? And then in 2009, or 2008, I mean, it was either 2008 or 2009, the French government said, we're going to send you a few intercomprehension specialists. And this is where Pierre Escudé and Pierre Janin, who are the authors of Le Point sur l'intercompréhension clé du plurilinguisme, visited CSULB. And this is where we really discovered what intercomprehension was. We didn't really quite know what it was. We knew that it had to do with, working in the Romance language family. But here we were actually, meeting people who were specializing in this, because in Europe, and we have today two of the most important practitioners of it, Elisabetta and Diego. But this field all of a sudden really dawned on us that this was really an area of expertise, and but there was a meeting point in the middle between what we were doing and what they were doing. So intercomprehension, which means the ability to understand the spoken and written languages belonging to the same family of languages if you know one of those languages. So in our case, this was the family of the Romance languages, because we are working with heritage speakers of Spanish or L2 speakers of Spanish. And I want to emphasize that our program, we also let in students who are L2 speakers, or they have an L2 knowledge of Spanish, because here's been one of our biggest problems in California. If you only have 17 high schools in the state of California that teach Italian, at the university, you almost never get anybody who can come into a third-year class. You're always starting at the beginning. And I think part of the statistics have something to do with this. Whereas, especially Spanish, you get students who come with 4 years of Spanish, they enter the advanced level. Statistically, they show as advanced, enrolled in the advanced classes, but they really did their, lower division work in the high school. So we were missing that group of people. So we started to think about, why not let those students in the Italian for Spanish speakers courses? So this has been really useful. It's not, you don't have to be Hispanic, you don't have to be a heritage speaker, but you have to have what we call the equivalent of 2 years of college, 4 years of high school. So this has also opened up. So if you look at our classes, you see a lot of students in there who are Anglos, but they had 4 years of high school Spanish. So these are the students in our Italian for Spanish speakers classes. We know who they are. What can we do about it, okay? So this is more of the story I was telling you. If you look at point 2, our methodology consists largely, or at the time, at first it started in accelerating the classes and experimenting with what we are now calling adapted intercomprehension. As you're going to discover when Elisabetta Bonvino and Diego give their presentation with the wonderful book, Uram 5, teaching students to read in 5 languages. And I am experimenting with this right now, because I'm actually teaching an intercomprehension class and using their book. But in a classroom where students are coming to learn Italian, they want to learn Italian. So how do you bridge the communicative approach, of which there are many things we like, but how do we then take advantage of their bilingual advantage? We're starting to do this through what we're calling adapted intercomprehension. So in terms of methodology, then we're trying to negotiate three methods: the communicative approach, what we're calling adapted intercomprehension and intercommunication, because whereas intercomprehension is mainly just comprehending but not speaking, we're adding a communicative piece to this, obviously. And then intercomprehension, we are putting in modules that are purely intercomprehension, languages in circulation for the purpose of understanding. Some of this, it's hard to believe, it took many years to get to this point where we actually have deployed a plan for a language acquisition class. So once again, what is intercomprehension? You'll be hearing this again. Utilizes a learner's knowledge of one Romance language, in our case Spanish, to accelerate the acquisition of a second or third Romance language. In our case, it's been French or Italian. So we wanted to, again, harness this capability, but without losing the fact that we are teaching these students Italian. These students need to come out of a first semester Italian class at the same level of speaking and everything else as do the students in the other class. Well, they come out with much higher levels of everything. That's the reality. But we need to also maintain some of the communicative pieces. Now, some of the differences between, of course, what European intercomprehension is and what we're calling North American, in a sense, intercomprehension. Those studying intercomprehension in Europe are almost always native speakers of at least one Romance language. But those studying intercomprehension in the United States are almost always heritage or L2 speakers of Spanish, whose linguistic identity is hybrid and or transnational. So we also have very different set of identity issues. And the language that has been, in a sense, left dormant and is in the process of being lost, because we know, again, I'm taking this from my studies of second language acquisition by colleagues in that field. What's happening in Spanish today is what happened to all of our own relatives generations back. They're his heritage speakers of Spanish are losing Spanish in one generation. Okay? It's only taking one generation. And so there's a lot of concern among the Spanish language acquisition scholars about how to stop this. And we think that intercomprehension, or we're seeing it, is also a way to preserve the language of Spanish for these heritage speakers. So their attitude toward heritage or L2 language is very different from the attitude of an L1 speaker. And this is something that for us is very important as we work with our students. So these are new contexts then for intercomprehension. And again, it's so wonderful to be able to work with the people doing intercomprehension and to think about ways that the new context in North America and also in South America, as you're going to hear from Diego a bit, are allowing us to really create new knowledge and new forms of language acquisition. So there are several factors in play. Again, the statistics I'll go through quickly. Census numbers confirm that Latinos alone will comprise 18% of the U.S. population. Already the states of California and Texas, they are 37.6%. When we analyze by age, Latinos under the age of 18 make up more than 50% of the youth population. 2006, they had a purchasing power of $789 billion, a figure that is expected to reach $1 trillion. So these are Americans with heritage and language that is a very interesting population for us. While social political motivations have been crucial for the development, a new set of social political criteria provide a backdrop for intercomprehension in the Americas. So Latin America, Canada, and the United States each offer distinctive socio-geographical contexts where intercomprehension can grow and prosper if the lens is adjusted. And just a side note, in June, Marcus and one of our wonderful instructors of Italian for Spanish speakers, Violetta Pasquarelli Gascon, went to the Canadian Society for Italian Studies, and we presented, and it was so interesting because all of the people in our audience said, why aren't we doing that for French speakers in Canada? All of our students they're forced to learn French in high school, yet we teach them as if they're all Anglo-speaking only. And it was like, you know, a brick had hit them on the head. They'd never really thought of this before. So again, these contexts, there's you know, multiple possibilities here. So why do Latino students study intercomprehension? Why do non-Latino students want to, and how are they brought in? I have just explained some of that. In French and Italian for Spanish speakers, we have 3 semesters of instruction each. I don't know, Marcus, are you going to be going into this more, or should I? So I won't stop on this too much because Marcus will explain more. But instead of 4 semesters, we have 3. So the program is accelerated. What motivates students? Better acquisition of the new language, better use of time at the university, improved job prospects. Most jobs that our graduates are looking at, they ask them for knowledge of 1 or 2 languages. I don't know what's going on, why universities don't seem to want to pay attention to this. They look at language programs, as we know, as, you know, takes too much time, costs too much money, the classes are too small, right? All these number games that Anthony referred to earlier. Now, Latino learners are able to see value in their bilingual competencies in English and Spanish within the framework that the learning of another Romance language affords them, be it French, Italian, or Portuguese. So this for them is a major plus. All of a sudden they're validated for being Spanish speakers. Many of these students in our university, these are students who have very often never set foot out of their little, out of the barrio very often. They are first-time university students, very similar to, it's very interesting, very similar to what, I mean, in a sense, I was the first person to go to university in my family, and there are a lot of interesting connections there. So we believe that a more solidly bilingual competence is emerging as competencies among similar languages are transferred. So there's a kind of language security that starts to emerge as we use Spanish and English. And another part of our presentation is we surveyed the students to ask them what they thought about all these things, and the survey results very much corroborate what I am presenting here. A stronger sense of self-confidence and, of course, a stronger sense of who they are and wanting to be who they are and preserve those aspects of themselves. So much of the work we have been doing has been with the help of Pierre Escudé, and a professor at the University of Toulouse. We are working on materials. This brings me to the last part of the presentation. One of the things about intercomprehension that's absolutely fantastic, it allows you to bring in authentic materials very, very early, and students are able to read very quickly a much higher level of texts than the than they are able to do in the non-Spanish speaking classes. As I said, speaking is important too. Communicative activities for intercomprehension of great interest in the United States context. I want to refer you to this article. We've gotten a lot of press. The LA Times came out in 2011. and interviewed our students, and wrote what we find to be a very positive assessment of this program and its potential. This was already back in 2011. We've been on Univision. It's been written up in many Spanish language newspapers. Again, the reception of this project among the Latino world has been extremely positive, recognizing the importance of this bilingual and bicultural community. So I talked about that already, and here a little more about the NEH project is that we have been expanding. So in our next problem seemed to be, we're doing this here, but so what? I mean, what good is it if we're not able to begin to expand into other contexts? So our NEH grant, we have, let's see, we have 3 high schools working with us. San Pedro High School was ideal because it is the only high school in the state of California that teaches 4 years of Italian without blending the classes. Other people are trying to do it. This is one of the problems with the AP. There's a lot of, they've started a few online courses to try to increase the number of courses for students to do AP. We actually have an online Italian course that we taught last summer that went very well. I'm just throwing this out there because this is the head of languages at LAUSD wants to promote our online Italian course to students in the LA Unified School District who can't take Italian otherwise, but want to take Italian and not another language. So we're working with him, looking at how the online class at the university can be used, and then how those students can be funneled into going forward with AP. So we really need to be thinking creatively if we're going to save the AP, but there are lots of ways to do it, and we need to take advantage of new audiences, new methodologies, really everything we can. So 4 Southern California institutions, 2 community colleges, and 3 high schools, and San Pedro was the first to begin this year. We're very excited. That's year 2 of our grant, and they were already able to get their principal to agree. They did recruiting in the feeder middle schools, and everybody's very happy about how all of that has gone. As I said earlier, 46 students in Italian for Spanish speakers, 41 in French for Spanish speakers. Obviously, a lot is riding on this. Having success in the high school environment will be very important in of the ability to replicate this, and hopefully bringing more funding to this project. We've spoken quite a bit with William Chang, who's very supportive, thinking about ways to expand to maybe, if this is successful, trying to find 5 more high schools. This will create jobs for Italian teachers, but you really have to scale. You have to really scale it up slowly. But so far, Ida Lanza, who is the Italian teacher, they're very excited about the way it's going. They are using what we refer to as the adapted intercomprehension model, which means that we present to our students the structures that we're teaching in Italian, Spanish, and English. We're using 3 languages in the classroom. Why not show it to them? Why force them to spend time learning what a reflexive verb is when they already know it? Then you move to the communicative, after you've shown them the structure, then you move to the communicative part, and you're able to communicate without having to spend a lot of time on a grammar explanation. We use English as well because, I mean, there are many ways to argue that English works very well with the Romance languages. So for our NEH grant, I'll just go through this really quickly. For the National Endowment for the Humanities, obviously they don't fund language acquisition. What they fund is better access to humanities content. So in our proposal, this is what we talked about, the ability of these students to read much more quickly in a number of humanities disciplines. And so, as you'll see, reading is a big component of what we do. This was, as I said, the intellectual rationale, augmenting humanities content, which is, of course, absolutely the case. These are things Marcus is going to talk about a lot more, but the building of the metalinguistic and metacultural awareness, all of a sudden students start thinking about the broader issues of language and seeing languages as related, sensitivity as well as critical thinking. Thanks to the simultaneous study of many cultures, languages, and literatures. Traditional learning works more on a binary juxtaposition, intercomprehension, especially when we see what our colleagues are going to be talking to us about, employing content in a space that promotes integration and connections rather than exclusion, right? What does the communicative approach tell us to do? You don't know any other language but the one you're learning. I mean, what we're doing, nothing could be further from this idea. So our project is opening a dialogue about new teaching practices for new audiences and educators. We've had lots of visitors come in. One of the people who will be visiting us is Claire Crumpsch. If any of you are aware of her work, she's very much moved in the direction of multilingualism and talking about things like, why are we not aware of who our students are? Why can't we teach using 2 or 3 languages together? Why can't we ask a question in the target language and have a student answer in Spanish? These are the things we're doing in our classes, but it's very interesting to see these things now being articulated by some of the most important people in the field. So, going back to this, who our students are, to summarize this part of the presentation, we looked at who our students were, started thinking seriously about their double competencies, a growing reality in California, a growing reality nationally. In the past, sociolinguistic biases have prevented us from seeing 2 fundamental realities. The belief that English has little or no connection with Romance languages. It's amazing when we start to work with English how many connections they are. Why not? English is a resource. The students know English, they know Spanish, let's use both of them. In many cases, Spanish for our students is not seen as an academic level language on the same level of English. And this is very important for them. All of a sudden, they become aware of Spanish as an academic language, not just a household language. And this is a very important transition for them. These things, I know I'm preaching to the choir when I say them, but again, very much echoing what Carlo has said, what Roberto has said in the globalized world, the advantages of knowing more than one language and the reality of being in multilingual situations that we pretend that we don't live in. We can't really pretend otherwise anymore. So, again, this is an article, Marcus is going to talk about some of these things. Claire Crumpsch has written on the multilingual learner. She has a book on that. This particular article is very interesting. Authenticity and legitimacy in multilingual second language acquisition. I think better than anything else, just the title of this article tells us where some of the greatest thinkers in the area of second language acquisition are going and how they're thinking about this. So, this is another summary slide. If you look at my last point, as I said, I'm now teaching an intercomprehension class at CSULB. happy to discuss that experience using UROM, which you're going to experience. That is a fascinating situation. I have students from many languages, and we're speaking in many languages and reading in many languages, and it's a very interesting environment. The challenges, as I said, are bringing the communicative approach together with intercomprehension, and what you'll see in the demonstration of some of the materials is some of our attempts to do this. We've actually done, we're experimenting with many other things this semester, but it is a team effort, and this is why it's so wonderful to see the expansion and more people interested in this. So I don't know how I'm doing with time. As I said, one of the things we do is obviously we're able to accelerate, we're able to move more quickly, and for the time being, for example, at San Pedro High School, and in order to articulate the programs properly, just so you know, the goal at San Pedro and the goal that was acceptable to, the goal that was acceptable at San Pedro High School to the Office of the Los Angeles Unified School District was an acceleration of 2 years in one. So the goal of the French and Italian for Spanish speakers program at San Pedro High School is to cover the content of 2 years in 1 year with the Spanish speaking students. And the goal there is to bring them to the AP in the 3rd year instead of the 4th. So if this is successful, in 3 years we're going to have a bumper crop of students who are in this Spanish, French and Italian for Spanish speakers, taking the Italian AP and also taking the French AP, which is not doing terribly well either. So it's very interesting, though, to have these cohorts of students moving in this way. And they're experimenting with, they will be experimenting with some of our materials. But of course, in order to satisfy the school district, they needed to show that they were using the same books, but the acceleration was an acceptable means of, for the school district, for allowing this course to receive full recognition. It receives the full recognition of 2 years of study. The other thing I should mention very quickly is that many of the high schools in Southern California teach Spanish for Spanish speakers. Is that also true on the East Coast? Yes. It's very interesting. We've heard from a lot of the teachers of Spanish for Spanish speakers who don't really like these classes. They say that a lot of the students in Spanish for Spanish speakers feel that they're in a remedial class, and it's not very good for their self-esteem. And that lots of the students, when they, instead of going to Spanish for Spanish speakers at San Pedro, they chose to use their Spanish as a means to learn another language. So French and Italian for Spanish speakers were seen as having a more academic cachet and more academically valid in a certain sense than going into the Spanish for Spanish speakers, which sometimes does not necessarily pick up the most academically motivated students. So I thought this was an interesting thing. So we have begun creating modules. This particular module was created by one of our collaborators, Cedric Oliva, who is thank you. Cedric Oliva, who is a Corsican who speaks French, obviously, Italian, and Corsican. And he's been a very interesting collaborator to have because he also has introduced some Corsican, a Romance language, into some of his teaching. But here we were working, what we did is we looked through a number of textbooks and looked at the progression of textbooks in both French and Italian to see how and where we could insert certain modules at certain points. So as I was saying, the idea is we present the students the structures in Italian, Spanish, and English. And then we start to work in this modified intercomprehension limited to 3 languages. So limited to Spanish, Italian, this is why I'm saying limited, and English, and we often put in French as well later. So you'll see how some of this works. So here we have these labels: el bebé, el niño, el adolescente, el adulto, el viejo. And here's the Italian, and the students are asked to match them. And it's kind of a fun exercise. This is a very easy exercise, obviously, but this is how, but we've brought Spanish in here. So then we might look at this vocabulario: Italiano, Spagnolo, Inglese. We throw in the English here, and they get, this is where we want to create a few aha moments. Oh, okay, baby, but child, They notice the things that are similar, and they notice immediately, of course, Italian and Spanish are very similar. But there's echoes, of course, in English as well. Here we have the plural, and here we start to introduce a little short reading, and we've also thrown in French. So we'll start working with these. Here's the Italian. Mi chiamo Adri, ho 46 anni, Roberta ha 16 mesi, Marco ha 100 anni, Angelina e Anna hanno 16 anni, Patrizio ha 8 anni. Let's take a look at something in Spanish. Me llamo Wendy. And you can either leave the French sitting there, or you can pay attention to it. But it's very easy at this point to go very quickly through the French piece as well. The students are seeing they're seeing the connections. And then we have a chart that they can work on, and the chart is all in Italian, though. So we're asking them to use the information from 3 languages. So here we're really in a Claire Crumptian kind of exercise that it's interesting in her article. She's like, why aren't people doing these kinds of things? It was very exciting for us because I think if you show this to a communicative approach person, they might throw you out the window. But this is, it's very, the students, and by the way, the students love this because all of a sudden they possess somehow, well, they possess the knowledge to work with. There's a kind of a liberating thing here. Instead of being given comprehensible input until they're blue in the face, they are finding a lot of comprehensible input in other languages. And now here we're asking them to work in the target language, but they're taking knowledge from other languages, but working in Italian. So they love this exercise, and here we're really, moving them along in their acquisition of Italian, but we're using several languages to do that. So then we have another exercise. Chi c'è nella foto? Nella prima foto ci sono 2 bambini, dos niños, they might say. And you can just throw out, would you say it in spagnolo, come si dice? Dos niños, 2 ragazzi. O 2 bebés, 2 ragazzi, 2 niños, 3 adolescenti, eccetera, eccetera. 2 vecchi, 5 adulti. But they have a lot of fun with this. And again, here, you'll find the students. Can anybody, then you can just throw it out. Qualcuno lo sa in francese? And you'll have the student in the back. Sì, 2 enfants. Un attimo, però hai introdotto adesso una circolazione nelle lingue cioè è molto interessante, è molto vivace questo scambio. Poi qui, di nuovo, esercizio di riproduzione in italiano. Come si chiamano? Okay? So they have to go back and look and again fill this in, but they're working with other languages, okay? Maria Claire, Roberta, Gilberto, Paul, Patrizio, Anna, Carla, Blandine, Jean, Angelina e Anna, Cindy, Wendy, Audrey, Alberto, Jean, and Marco, okay? Here again, using the same material, but so we have, again, here, we're having them produce in Italian, but they're using the knowledge from Spanish and from French to fill in the rest of these. In questa famiglia spagnola ci sono, e lo devono scrivere, in questa famiglia francese ci sono, e devono leggere, usando il loro intercomprehension, e riempire qua, finire queste storielle di queste famiglie. Va bene? Now, intercomprehension, as you're going to discover when you hear the presentation from Elisabetta and Diego, works with bridges, the ponti, what the connecting points. If you're studying Romance linguistics, right, you're looking at this in a very focused linguistic kind of way, the relations to Latin. But this is really a kind of applied Romance linguistics, and we're looking at these bridges. And so we look at some of the things that are obvious, but we've never brought them to the attention of our students before. So we're going to be working here with tor, dor, ter, and torre, right? So this is a little piece on the personality, and we like to throw in little comic things here. This is, of course, in English. My wife told me what type I was last week. It wasn't any of these, because we're going to be working with personality traits. So here we go. And here we've also thrown in Portuguese. And again, you can use it or not use it, but it's there. You can just use the Spagnolo, Italiano, Francese, going from the rivista Mente, rivista di psicologia, qual è la tua personalità, dominatore, simpatico, gentile, manipolatore, malizioso. So they work with these different, calme, sociable, observateur, provocador, protector, ottimista, pessimista, miedoso. So again, the same thing, but now we're working with adjectives. Here it looks like I'm skipping I'm just trying to give you a sampling of the kinds of things we do. Here we've taken Le Petit Prince, El Principito, El Piccolo Principe, the Little Prince. Here I'm just showing you the Italian piece of it, but we actually work with, we'll work with the version in Spanish too. We'll give them the version also in French if they want to look at it. But here we're able to pick up some of these ponti, some of these bridges, autore, aviatore, motore, and if you go through here, there are different things that will be picked up in some future exercises. They absolutely love Le Petit Prince, Il Piccolo Principe. They love to work with this text. I don't know if it brings up fond memories from childhood or if as adults we love to work with this, but we've had a great deal of success with working with this text, and we find that very early students are immediately able, a Spanish speaker is able to read this in Italian really quickly. The same thing for the Spanish speakers in the French classes where we first experimented with it. It was amazing that they were able to read this text also with lots of verb tenses they didn't really know yet, but maybe they knew the story, and again the familiarity plays a role there. So here we have a number of questions. We're asking them to work immediately with this text. Quante persone incontra sul suo cammino, cosa fa l'autore, cosa fa l'abitante, eccetera, eccetera. And they're working in Italian. They could also answer these questions in Spanish if you want them to, because you're giving them the Spanish version. Again, working with the different languages. So here we took this off on another track. So we've worked with Al piccolo principe piace la sua rosa, cosa piace agli americani? Il vino. E qui abbiamo creato questo esercizio con un articolo di Wikipedia. By the way, Wikipedia is a wonderful source because it's in the public domain. You can use as many things as you want from it. And very often, you can find it in French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese. You can find the same article. So we have felt very free in using Wikipedia. And of course, this is a fun article that again brings up that bridge that we were working with, attori, sapori, amatore, ambasciatori, agricoltore, e viticoltore, right? And it talks about wine, e californiani. So what could be better? This is really a great California piece. Consumano un sacco di vini europei. A Los Angeles, quanti attori apprezzano il buon vino, eccetera, eccetera. So this has been a really fun reading to work with too. But again, reinforcing this. And here, after we've done this reading, then we ask them to work in groups to finish this schema. So we put it in, we snuck in Portuguese here, but we have put in the three colors, the languages that we're really asking them to work with. Spagnolo, Francese, Italiano, fill in. Here we also put Corso and Romano. Just again, you put them there so people can, what's interesting is the students by themselves often go off, you do something for them that you would, they start to look, I wonder how you say this in this language. I wonder, there's a kind of internal language curiosity that is sparked here. So, right, this is, we've already seen that. And here it's being filled in. Che cosa notate? Quando c'è scritto toro, d'oro in spagnolo, c'è scritto ter o der in francese, e torre in italiano. Here they've learned this bridge. And what we've noticed, once they know this, it's like, boom, they've got it. They have really acquired a chiave di lettura che non gli toglie più nessuno. So here they are now padroni in un certo senso di queste chiavi, no? Che possono applicare sempre. And the power of having these bridges for them is so great because you've given them tools. And we've noticed these tools, they use these tools. So this is how then that's ended. Ci vediamo presto, arrivederci, on se voit bientôt, au revoir. And that is that. Yeah, come on up, Marcus.
No, just.
Well, you need the microphone because it's being recorded.
I wanted to,
No, but they want it recorded.
okay.
I'm not going to
Sorry
let
for
them.
butting in.
No, do.
What Clorinda had on the very first slide, this is a week 3 first semester activity. So these students reading Italian here in week 3, which normally does not happen in a traditional Italian course in week 3. And this is, of course, embedded in a regular communicative language sequence with the textbook, and they're starting out learning adjectives and forming singular plural here in Italian, simple vocabulary, adjectives, agreement of adjectives. Yet, if you look at those texts, they're quite advanced. You don't find these texts really in a 3-week textbook that early. And they're reading it without much of a problem. Sometimes we let them read the Spanish with it. It does prevent, to a certain degree, this kind of like word-by-word translation. Students really kind of like look for the Spanish to figure it out, what it means. But they really read more in a sense of reading, rather than going word by word and then they stop at the first word that they don't know and go for a dictionary, try to figure it out. They read more fluidly. And so there are a lot of benefits to this.
Right, these are the intercomprehension reading strategies that are incredibly powerful that you're going to hear about in UROM. We're using those strategies, and now that I'm teaching with UROM, it's really exciting because I'm, again, seeing how to use these strategies even more actively in our courses, teaching students to read, to section off the word they don't know, look for the meaning by looking at the other Romance languages instead of going to a dictionary, and then discovering connections themselves. So they'll see the word in French and they'll go, oh, okay, I see, okay, now I know what that means. So working with other languages instead of looking it up in English. This is the goal of this. So I'm wondering if we should have a few, I'm supposed to stop at 11? Should I take some questions? Because should we do the survey piece during yours?
We can, I think.
Or do you want me to do it now?
We can build it in. I mean, if there are some questions
Yeah.
for this segment, I think it would make sense because we have.
Right, because I've been talking at you here now for about an hour. So we have the survey piece, which is very interesting, but I think we can maybe put it into Marcus's presentation where you get to hear what the students think of this. I think that's very powerful. I'd like to entertain any questions at this point. Yes. Oh, right.
Which one?
Oh, you're going to be asked to speak into the microphone.
Hi, my name is Christine Massari. I teach Italian and Spanish at West Orange High School, and I have, thank goodness we have so many Hispanic students studying the language now because it's really saved our program with the changing demographics within our area. It was once a traditionally Italian area, and now it's changed quite a bit. And the majority are from South American countries, a couple from Central America and Mexico. In teaching, I do a lot of contrast with Spanish because I, speak Spanish fluently. And I do a lot, especially with sounds, like with hard sounds, soft sounds, because I find the kids are able to pronounce within a week. They can pronounce the language. I'm just wondering, with brain research, we've learned that people who are born and speak bilingually, in which they're learning the language at the same time. They've shown in studies that if they were lighting up the brain, it would light up one spot in the brain for the bilingual language. But when you learn them consecutively or at different times in life, each language is at a different part of the brain. They've had tests done like this. There are papers that have been written on this. And I'm wondering, for a person who has only had one language, or let's say the native language is Spanish, and they learn English when they're 5 years old in school, depending on the case, because sometimes they're learning them simultaneously, depending on the parents' backgrounds. You might have the Spanish and English at the same part, but if they're learning French and Italian, they're getting them simultaneously. Would those be at different brain points? Are they different points of reference? And what would be, the reason I'm asking this is, what is the degree of interference that you might find with them learning the languages simultaneously? I remember when I was doing my master's, I was doing an Italian master's and a Spanish master's simultaneously. And there were times, because I'm a native speaker of English, I was not a bilingual speaker. And there were times when I would confuse vocabulary words or some structures. After I finished college and I started traveling more to the countries, this started to dissipate, and I found that there was more of an independent thought process. But I'm wondering about the interference.
That's a really good question. The research on the brain seems to, there are a lot of different kinds of research about this, and so I think that we don't really know definitively. I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done, and it's certainly something that I don't want to necessarily hazard a response to the brain part. But what I will tell you is that what we've noticed, as opposed to what would happen with communicative language teaching only, we would get this classic thing, we always say, gli parlo in italiano e mi rispondono in spagnolo, angry, because by giving them the Spanish together with the Italian, it seems like they're able to keep them apart more easily, because now they're seeing them together and they're working with them together. I want to specify that in the classes where we're teaching Italian, This piece where you saw some French and the other languages in here, that's a small part of the lessons during the week. We do that part that's intercomprehension where we pull in some of the other languages, maybe in 2 20-minute segments, just to show them again there's part of a bigger, there's a language family here. But we're working primarily in this adapted intercomprehension mode using Spanish, Italian, and English. And so, like I was saying, using the Spanish seems to somehow make it easier for them to keep Spanish and Italian apart. I had the same issue you did. I am not a native speaker of anything but English. I learned all my languages at the university, and I was always doing the same thing. I felt like I was always fighting to keep them apart. And what I've noticed here is that giving up the fight, it seems to be productive.
Hi, I've really enjoyed your remarks, but I have a very quick question.
Yes.
And that is that you mentioned that you have growing numbers in Italian.
Yes.
And following on Roberto's discussion of the MLA report about the 10-to-1 ratio, I'm wondering if this has translated into growing numbers in advanced Italian courses.
Yes, and Marcus will talk about this. We have a first and second semester for Spanish speakers. We have a 1-semester hybrid course, 6 units. We do the whole second year in 1 semester. That class is huge. I mean, it keeps growing. This semester, I think we have 28 students in that class. We've been noticing almost a 70% carryover of those students into the 3rd year. That is what's making our program grow at the upper levels. That's what's given us the bump in the majors. That's what convinced the chancellor's office that we had the numbers to start a master's program. So all of this happened in the last 3 years. We had to present numbers to the chancellor's office in order to convince them, and the argument was convincing. So that's why I see this group of students who are motivated to go on and who are able to read quickly. This is the big thing. They're successful readers of Italian literature, and they find a lot of resonances in Italian literature and culture with their own backgrounds, and there's a high motivation to go forward.
I think one of the best emergencies that's been expressed by several people today is that the Italian AP exam is unfortunately again on the ropes, and it's a matter of a couple of years that the numbers have to go up significantly. What you're proposing here is beautiful. Let's call it Italian for Spanish speakers. What my question is, would an answer to this most pressing problem be a textbook called Italian for Spanish speakers, and is that part of your project?
Yes, yes, that is part of our project, and in fact, we are working, putting forth some proposals actually right now with some publishers to actually do that, because this is what everybody wants. They want it laid out, and rightly so. Yes.
On this project and this particular question, our idea of a textbook probably will contain several languages. So Italian for Spanish speaker, well, it will be Italian, French at this point for Spanish speakers. The idea is in the sense that Spanish will be always your reference language #1. All the speakers in a course that would use this textbook have Spanish as their background. All other Romance languages become support languages. So if we teach Italian, Spanish is reference #1, and French, Portuguese become support languages. If we turn this around and we teach, with the same book, we teach French, then Spanish is again your reference #1, and Italian becomes support language, or whatever you have. So there's a very modular aspect to it. When you propose a textbook, you also have to suggest new formats. to a publisher because it has to make business sense. But you can very easily, the way we have started this project, simply flip things over. And you can, maybe it's called Italian for Spanish speakers and one French for, but it would ultimately be the same textbook except that you flip things around a little bit.
I don't have a question. I just want to express my happiness because I just started a course of Italian for Spanish speakers in Georgetown, and I thought that we were alone in this in this endeavor. I had been teaching Italian to Spanish speakers in Mexico for years, for 14 years. And we saw that. I mean, we had 1,000 people enrolled in first-year Italian in Mexico City because there is such an attraction and such a intercomprehension between the cultures and the languages that it's crazy that this is not exploited more. So I'm really happy to hear what you're doing. But I also wanted to underline that I think it's very important what you're saying, that we've been suppressed by the communicative approach to completely ignore the languages we come from. And I also agree that these languages can be a resource instead of a hindrance. Yes, there is interference. Yes, we confuse things. Yes, there is that side. But there's also an immense possibility of using languages as a resource and having students see them as a resource instead of suppressing them all the time. One thing I did, for example, to teach pronunciation was just, okay, tell me all the words you know in Italian already. And they start from Starbucks, latte, this and that, cappuccino, whatever. They know those words. It's just you teach them how to pronounce them in Italian. So instead, I think that's a very, very good point. And the second good point is that, yes, we can export those experiences to high school. And I think in a lot of cities in the US, we could think of that as a way of expanding the AP. So thank you very much.
Well, I'm very happy. What is your name? You're Anna. I'm so happy you're here because I saw that course. Well, you had also written, but then I saw that course that came out, and I go, wow, they're doing this at Georgetown. I can't wait to talk to somebody. I'm very happy that you're here, and I think that again, what your experience is. We're having some of the same experiences with this, and I think it's very exciting.
Abbiamo spazio solo per 2 brevissime domande.
Benissimo.
Comunque durante tutta la giornata i relatori sono sempre qua, quindi si può fare questa discussion anche.
My question is very brief. I just wondered, with your heritage speakers that don't read Spanish, does that present a problem? I mean, do you find yourself teaching reading in Spanish as well as in Italian?
No. What ends up happening is, so we encourage the students to come into the class. There's a self-selection process. So you do have many levels of Spanish in there. The student who really feels that they're completely lost will leave. But I have to say that you're talking about at the most 1 or 2 students every semester. The student who has never read in Spanish really quickly picks it up. Again, this is where it becomes a preserving of the heritage language. They become motivated then. It's not that difficult, obviously, being a phonetic language, for them to learn to read in what is their heritage language. So we haven't had any problems with that. If anything, as you'll see from the survey, they say how much their Spanish has improved in the course for Italian or French for Spanish speakers, and that's a positive outcome, especially in an intercomprehension environment.
Ok, domanda veloce.
Sì.
Per insegnare un corso del genere, quale livello di competenza deve avere un insegnante in spagnolo? In
Questa è
altri
un'ottima
termini,
domanda.
Deve essere bilingue?
No.
Perché a livello elementare posso capire.
No, e questo è anche un'altra bella cosa dell'intercomprensione che mi piace moltissimo. Per lavorare in diverse lingue della stessa famiglia, no, non devi avere una competenza native, no? Noi abbiamo sperimentato moltissimo, ovviamente, con il nostro corpo insegnante, perché abbiamo una grande varietà. Io, per esempio, io parlo abbastanza bene lo spagnolo, non perfettamente, però abbastanza per insegnare i corsi. E abbiamo questo semestre una professoressa molto in gamba, lei era professoressa di latino in Italia, insegna italiano per noi. Lei ha fatto 3 anni di corsi in spagnolo perché questo era il suo obiettivo. Sta insegnando il primo semestre di Italian for Spanish Speakers con grande successo. Lei è una persona molto in gamba, sta facendo proprio un lavoro di didattica molto bella, però lei non lo parla da una conoscenza dell'università, diciamo. Quindi però funziona benissimo, gli studenti sono contenti, quindi no, non devi avere una competenza, diciamo, non devi essere bilingue italiano-spagnolo, per niente, no. C'era un'altra cosa che volevo dire che mi era venuta in mente mentre Anna mi ha fatto la sua domanda. Dobbiamo, e questo è il metodo comunicativo, ci impone un'immagine di native speaker che non esiste. Ma chi è questo native speaker? Non esiste da nessuna parte. I nostri native speaker in spagnolo, infatti l'altro giorno con il testo stavo insegnando il corso di intercomprehension e c'era il testo con il bambino che cade sotto un treno e gli viene un bel bernocolo. Questa parola bernocolo, cioè lo studente salvadoregno aveva una parola, scusate. Lo studente, sì, ecco, perché in questa classe parliamo in tutte le lingue. Io infatti mi piace molto perché parlo spagnolo con una libertà. Loro signora, si dice così, ma non importa. Cioè, comunque è molto 4 parole per questa parola bernocolo, bellissimo. Lo studente di Venezuela aveva una parola, lo studente messicano aveva una parola, lo studente di Bolivia, e quindi questo è stato un momento di intercomprensione e di native speakers. Sono tutti native speakers, ma quale spagnolo e quante varietà. Va bene, con questo finisco, vi ringrazio tantissimo della vostra attenzione.